Thank you all. Thanks, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you all. It's great to see you all. It's great to be back in big rooms together. Lots of energy, and I'm excited about that. It's also great because I'm an unemployed former diplomat, so thank you for having me here today. Craig, thanks for that very kind introduction. I had this incredible privilege these past 4 years, and it means so much to me to be back with you at this annual summit, to make it a habit. I love coming back to this place, to you as a group, and I, of course, love being back in my neck of the woods, back in the Midwest, flyover country. My wife, Susan, was born in Iowa City, although she was raised in Wichita. She spent her summers at Coralville and Strawberry Point. So that's why I'm back. I don't know why some of these other folks are coming back now. I can't figure it out. And by the way, I also watched the Northern Iowa Panthers destroy Wichita State just too many times. It was emotionally very difficult to me. Look, it's been almost 6 months now since the administration left office. I'll be honest with you, it has been tough for me to watch what is going on and what has gone on in these 6 months. People say to me all the time, I'll bet you're glad to have that big burden lifted from your shoulders. And I have to tell you, I'm not. I wish that I was still there. I wish that I still had the opportunity to do the work that we did for 4 years, protecting and securing your freedom, protecting your rights, all of the things. All of the things I got to do. I was occupied at office held by Thomas Jefferson in Madison, and my son, we were walking down the hall the day I was to be sworn in as Secretary of State, and he was looking. They have portraits of all the former secretaries, and there they were, right? All these greats. Jefferson, Madison. The son says, Jefferson, Madison, Pompeo. I don't know. I don't know, Dad. I love you. Good luck. The truth of the matter is, as you sit here, you know this. I'm not going to be them. But they create a vision, a wisdom, an inspiration for me every day to know that the American founding, the things that you all love and know, our Judeo-Christian tradition lives on. And this was the work we were engaged in. It gave me courage, too, when the New York Times wrote that I was the worst Secretary of State in history. And the Washington Post followed it up with a very similar headline. My son, who I love, he's now 30, thought, well, Dad's pretty tough, but maybe the second time a major newspaper says it, he needs some. So he calls and says, Dad, I was checking it out. I was doing some history, and there's this fellow named Elihu Washburn. Anybody heard of Elihu Washburn? No. He lasted 11 days as Secretary of State. And so my son says, surely you're better than he was. You can't be the worst. Look, we know what the left is trying to do to human beings that believe in Christ in the way that we do. We've seen it. And the president called me in January and said, the Washington Post headline today says, you're my most loyal cabinet member. I reminded him they didn't mean that as a compliment. And look, you're here today talking about leading with principles over politics. And I want to say something that I believe is very straightforward. You may not hear it from some other elected officials. All of the crises facing our nation today, the big challenges that we are all confronted, aren't going to be solved by any politician. It's not the way the Lord works. Our problem isn't the people affecting change, the hearts and minds, because we know only that Christ has the capacity to do that. And he will put principled men and women in those positions, but it is he who will make the changes that our nation so richly needs and will defend our nation at its most dire time of need. Now look, I know this, even those words I just told you, you probably wouldn't have heard them from any Secretary of State before me, Republican or Democrat. I was a different kind of Secretary of State. My wife says I was the first redneck Secretary of State. And it didn't always make friends for me. When we confronted the Chinese Communist Party, that godless party that is doing so much destruction not only to its own people and the churches in China, and people who want to practice their faith in China, and the Uyghur Muslims in the West, we know it wants to export that here at home. When we called them out on that, they sanctioned me. I can no longer travel to China. That's just fine, actually. It reminds me when I was sanctioned on January 20th, just as I was leaving office, they didn't even have the courage to sanction me while I was still Secretary of State. My son is engaged. His fiancee, Rachel, called and said, "Am I marrying into the sanctions regime?" I believe the answer is yes, Rachel. God bless you. Enjoy Shanghai before the wedding. Look, we can all be a force for good. And the Trump administration tried every day to be a force for good in humans' lives. Both here in the United States, our first job was to make sure we put America first. We literally took American foreign policy and put America back in that foreign policy. Today it would be climate change policy or whatever, right? A different way of thinking about how we preserve the things that we all care so deeply about and affect us each and every day in our lives. Nowhere is that more important than with our families. And I saw that as I traveled the world as Secretary of State. I was deeply mindful of how my work impacted our families here at home. It's why the family leader is so important. It's why I'm so glad you are all here today at this summit in 2021. The name indeed says so much. Your mission should indeed be every believer's mission, to inspire Christ-like leadership in the home, church, and government. If we get that right, if we get that piece of it right, we will do what politicians have failed to do for an awfully long time. Now, I know when there's media in the back here, I know when they hear this, some will break out the pitchforks. Fair enough. When they heard every day when I was Secretary of State that I turned every morning to God to provide me guidance as I was trying to execute my mission, I understood they found that deeply troubling. And by the way, the State Department lawyers didn't like it either. This wasn't a new idea that I was professing. I relied on God when I was a fifth grade Sunday school teacher too, and it taught me pretty well. It served me pretty well. It was perfect practice for being part of a complex organization. Yes, fifth grade Sunday school and international diplomacy, what they have in common. It would be a long set of remarks. Look, I love this quote from Lincoln. So many of you know it. I've been driven, he said, I have been driven many times upon my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had literally nowhere else to go. The work of the organization that you are here to support today around the country strengthens families, and this organization is indispensable in that cause. And I want to thank Bob for his efforts to build that out. I will tell you that as we stare at the problem sets that we all are aware of today, we see in our homes, on television, that the breakdown of the American family is at the core of most of them. It's why the left attacks it. It's why the left wants to undermine the family unit upon which this nation was built. And you're all here because those attacks, strike at the very concept of America, that not only is the family, but our churches and schools are under assault too. And you are right. You are right that our nation is threatened. You are right to be concerned. That's why I'm counting on you, people of faith, people like Susan, my wife, and me, to champion our faith, to do so fearlessly, and to champion the American values that have made this the most exceptional nation in the history of civilization. If we don't defend it, if we don't value life as an example, we know where this leaves us, right? I am grateful that I was able in my time as a Christian to protect human dignity around the world, and that overlapped with America's interest. It was a centuries-old commitment, but one, frankly, that the Biden administration has already sought to undo. We were, in fact, the most pro-life administration in the history of the United States of America. I had worked on this issue when I was a member of Congress, but I had this unique opportunity when I was the Secretary of State to work to make sure that not a single dollar that came to the State Department ended up in the hands of an abortion provider somewhere in the world. Not one of your taxpayer dollars ever. It was important as a first principle. No taxpayer dollar should ever go to any abortion anywhere. But we also knew that devaluing human life undermines families, and it is a hallmark of communist totalitarian regimes around the world. I mentioned this a bit ago. Take Take China, take the Chinese Communist Party. They celebrated their 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party last week. This was an achievement. But they lay claim to being among the largest murderers of people in the world. Today, they are conducting what I declared to be genocide in Western China, detaining over 1 million Muslims, forcing sterilizations, forced abortions, people living in internment camps that look and feel much like what the world saw and lived through in Germany in the 1930s. I was proud of the work we did to call them out for that and to build a global coalition that recognized that this is fundamentally immoral and that to permit this to continue undermined American security in a way that was deep and important and fundamental. You know, I think too about the work that our administration did alongside great partners in Israel. I was the first Secretary of State to ever travel to Judea and Samaria. This was important. It was important to make clear that we don't view Israel as an occupying power. This was, you know this, right? As Bible believers well know, this was the place where Christ was born. He preached the gospel and went to die for the sins of the world. This is a special place. We were proud to do the work, whether it was moving our embassy or smaller things like recognizing that passports could say that Jerusalem, this city of peace, was an important place to the people of Israel. It was fun, the work that I did to make clear that all settlements weren't illegal, something that had been State Department policy for an awfully long time. I was rewarded that they named a wine after me at a winery in Judea and Samaria. And the joke was that it was great because it had an Italian name on the label. And so it was actually acknowledgement of the remarkable work that the Trump administration did, protecting and preserving this most important alliance and recognizing that the rightful Jewish homeland should be preserved and protected. And the United States had an important role in doing that. Our faith was challenged when we saw, just after our time in office, that the terrorists in Gaza began to launch rockets from, Iranian-backed rockets from the terrorist group Hamas sitting in the Gaza Strip. I think it was an indication that America's capacity to work with Israel and to deter and protect and defend Israel was under threat, and that this administration might not respond in the same way that ours would have. I hope this administration begins to get this right. I watched, too, as America's most senior diplomat, I watched other countries try to undermine our most valuable institutions. It was to their benefit if our institutions no longer could stand the pressure. I saw this most clearly in the work that they did alongside those who are trying to destroy our educational institutions. You all see the garbage they're trying to teach in our schools today. It comes under various guises, often called critical race theory, but suffice it today that it is a suggestion that somehow our nation is inherently and systemically racist. This is a nation that has borne the costs and benefits associated with equality like no other nation in the world. We should be proud of it. We should not challenge our founding. It was noble. I saw it most clearly in their Marxist-Leninist tendencies, right? They wanted to undermine. You saw the Chinese Communist Party sit across from my successor in Anchorage, Alaska, and berate the American Secretary of State and talk about the greatness of BLM. And talk about the riots that we had and said, you, America, are no better than we are. That is a godless nation challenging a God-fearing people. And our leadership must stand up against these threats from outside. It is incredibly important. They frankly don't like capitalism very much either, because in many cases they'd prefer that we adopt a model that looks more like theirs, more socialist, less willing to reward those who are prepared to work hard and to keep their faith and to practice that faith. These are nations who deny religious freedom to their own people. And so, when they saw during the crisis that resulted from the Wuhan virus being foisted upon America, they saw us begin to undermine our religious liberty here at home too, and they cheered. They cheered when they saw city councils or county commissions or governors say, no, you can't worship freely with your fellow believers. We all know this. We could do this. We'd figure out a way to do this safely. We could keep health in mind and still worship Jesus Christ. When we begin to diminish our faith and to act in ways that are not only inconsistent with our Constitution, but deeply immoral, we become less secure. And those who are adversaries, who want to undermine the very things we care most about, will be the ones who cheer this along. I know you all will never permit this to happen. And I know that the family leader is at the center of making sure these kind of things don't happen. I want to talk about one more thing, and then I have a couple of closing thoughts that I want to leave you with at this very important moment in our nation's history. I want to talk about the risks that we all have from crime that is rising here in the United States. We can talk about many reasons that this exists: the breakdown of the family, the absence of community, fewer people who are worshiping. There are lots of reasons. But make no mistake about it, one of the reasons is that we have often in our major cities in America given up the will to actually hold those who commit the crimes accountable for the crimes that they commit. This is not an American tradition, right? To try and undermine those great men and women who serve in our law enforcement community and say, no, we're just not going to pay you as much, or we're not going to recruit the next cop behind you. And if you do the work that keeps someone safe and they challenge you and say that you behaved in a way that was inconsistent with your duty, well, we may not have your back. We saw this too. We saw this idea of reform of our justice system really be an excuse to just let dangerous people back out on the streets. And we've seen too our unwillingness to secure our southern border as something that also put more criminals on our streets. And I don't know how many of you have seen the reporting just from the last few days. I saw this in my time as Secretary of State, is that we now have an enormous problem of Chinese fentanyl traversing through Mexico and coming through our southern border. And it's now on the streets of every community in the United States of America, including right here in Iowa. Each of us has a responsibility to make sure our leaders prevent this from happening. It will create greater risk of crime, and it will undermine the very communities that have made our nation so special, and indeed have made our union more perfect each and every year. Two final thoughts. We need to renew our commitment to our communities, and we need to work at this. You should know, in spite of all the challenges that I've just spoken to, I am long on America. I am very confident that this resilient nation will awaken, that there will be a revival, and that this nation will continue to be the most prosperous in the history of humankind. But none of that happens without keeping your faith. None of that happens without the hard work that goes alongside that. And through the grace of God, I know you will all engage in that. I had these enormous opportunities. I was a young cadet at West Point who frankly had been taken to church when I was a young man by my parents, but I was going to be the next NBA great power forward. I was focused on other things. But I had two young men who were just a year ahead of me in school. And on a Sunday afternoon during the first summer, called Plebe Summer at West Point, they invited me for cookies. This is a can't-miss proposition. Just like Fellowship Hall, it draws us all in. So I went, and those two men brought me to Jesus. They discipled me over the coming weeks. They made sure that I understood that it was important to read the Bible each and every day. They made sure that I asked the right questions about the complex task I would face as an American leader who was going to lead men into conflict, potentially putting their own lives at risk on behalf of the United States, how I couldn't accomplish that without a faith and an understanding that Jesus Christ would be right with us every step of the way. You all have the chance to lead and to disciple here in your community as well. We all need to do that. I remember when I was a deacon at my church, Eastminster Church, Presbyterian Church in Wichita, Kansas. Pastor Stan asked me to be a deacon, so I signed up to be a deacon. I love church politics. We ministered to our community. We're in the eastern part of Wichita, but within 10 miles of where we went to worship every Sunday, there were people who were under enormous economic hardship. There were families that were displaced. And we built out a program where we tried to build up those communities, and we invited them, and we tried to be welcoming to everyone. From whatever community they came, from whatever race, or whatever creed, we wanted them to understand that Jesus was important in their life as well. This is the call that we continue to have, and as we face these domestic crises here at home, which are often put to us by the media as secular crises, remind yourself that these are all crises of faith. And if we get that piece wrong, we can't fix any of those other problems. He indeed has a plan for America, and I am confident you all, through his grace, will help execute that plan. We are not a defeated nation. We are not a nation in decline. We are not a racist nation. We are a God-blessed Christian nation. Don't let the woke socialists get you down. Keep working. Recommit yourself to the community. I always recall one of my favorite parts of the Bible. Everybody's got their favorite. Mine is from chapter 3. It's when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked into the fire. You would all know this story. Into the fire, not burned or harmed. I felt like that in the Trump administration some days. Into the fire, where the left-wing media wanted to do nothing more than deny the American people what they voted for. The leadership of people who understood the Lord and understood our nation in the same way that they did. The faith of those three men is our faith. It's always ours, and it is ever present. And if we devote ourselves to that, and we are tireless in those efforts, and we're fearless in those efforts, and we never give an inch, and we do it with a smile and with the graciousness that the Lord commands, you should know that the Family Leader Summit of 2021 will take place again in the greatest nation that the world has ever known. God bless you. Thank you all for being here, and may the God bless your good works. Thank you so much.